The story opens on Meridian Gate, a notorious trade hub that exists in the legal gray space between three major star systems. It's technically governed by the Interstellar Commerce Accord, but enforcement is minimal, and corruption is endemic. The station operates as a haven for black market trade, smuggling operations, and transactions that would be illegal in any properly regulated territory. Marcus Webb is a human relief contractor, someone who specializes in navigating the bureaucratic and logistical nightmares of humanitarian operations in frontier territories. He's on Meridian Gate to negotiate supply contracts for refugee settlements in the Outer Rim, work that requires him to deal with merchants and traders whose ethics are questionable at best. It's morally exhausting work, but Marcus has learned to compartmentalize. Secure the supplies people need. Don't ask too many questions about where they came from. Get out before you see things you can't unsee. Except this time, he sees something he can't unsee. A contact mentions an exclusive auction happening in the station's lower commercial district, the kind of event that operates through encrypted invitations and requires significant financial credentials to access. The contact suggests it might interest Marcus since it involves contract labor opportunities. The phrasing makes Marcus's instincts flare with suspicion, but he's learned that sometimes you need to see the horror directly before you can do anything about it. The auction takes place in a converted cargo bay, its industrial origins barely disguised by temporary environmental controls and holographic displays. About 50 beings are in attendance, various species, all wealthy enough to be here, all maintaining the careful neutrality of people engaging in business they know is morally questionable but legally ambiguous. The merchandise being auctioned is presented as debt servants, beings who have allegedly signed contracts agreeing to labor in exchange for passage, shelter, or debt forgiveness. It's technically legal under certain interpretations of the Commerce Accord, though everyone in the room knows these contracts were obtained through coercion, fraud, or outright kidnapping. Marcus watches several auctions with growing disgust, his humanitarian work having shown him enough real debt servitude to recognize the trafficked individuals when he sees them. These aren't people who signed contracts voluntarily, they're prisoners with paperwork. Then 6 Korvathi women are brought onto the platform. The Korvathi are humanoid beings distinguished by their long, elegant ears and distinctive cultural practices. They're also known for their powerful sovereign empire centered in the Talviria system, an advanced civilization that has maintained strict neutrality in most galactic conflicts, but possesses military capabilities that make even major powers cautious. These 6 women are unusual. Despite their situation, they maintain perfect composure, standing with straight backs, heads high, expressions carefully neutral. Their clothing is worn but clean, and Marcus notices they move with synchronized precision, as if unconsciously maintaining formation even on an auction platform. The auctioneer presents them as a group lot. 6 Korvathi females, ages ranging from young adult to perhaps mid-30s by human estimation, contracts transferable as a set. Their backstory is deliberately vague. Refugees from a civil conflict, debts incurred during transport, standard labor contracts with 5-year terms. Marcus's experience with humanitarian crises tells him the story is fabricated. But what strikes him most is the way the women carry themselves, not broken by their circumstances, but contained, as if they're enduring something temporary while maintaining their essential dignity. The bidding starts. Several participants show interest: labor contractors looking for workers, station operators seeking staff, others whose intentions Marcus doesn't want to contemplate. The price climbs steadily, and Marcus finds himself doing calculations he knows are insane. His operational budget, his personal savings, the funds he'd set aside for emergency relief supplies. He shouldn't do this. He's here to negotiate supply contracts, not rescue trafficking victims. He doesn't have the resources to properly resettle 6 people. Getting involved could compromise his ability to help the refugee settlements that depend on his contracts. Every rational argument says to walk away, report what he's seen through official channels, let the proper authorities handle it. Marcus bids anyway. The amount he offers is substantial, more than he should spend, more than most of the other bidders are willing to commit for labor contracts of uncertain value. There's a pause, then the auctioneer accepts with the kind of smooth efficiency that suggests this is just another transaction. Marcus completes the financial transfer in a daze, barely processing the legal documentation being thrust at him: transfer of debt contracts, liability waivers, documentation that supposedly makes this legitimate commerce rather than human trafficking. He signs everything mechanically, his mind focused on a single objective: get these 6 women out of this cargo bay and somewhere safe. When he approaches them after the transaction is complete, the women regard him with careful neutrality. Their ears are angled backward. The Corvathi expression he's learned indicates caution or defensive posture. They're evaluating him, trying to determine what kind of owner he'll be. Marcus pulls out a small cutting tool and approaches the nearest woman, who stiffens slightly. "I'm going to cut these restraints," he says quietly. "Then we're going to walk out of here calmly and find transport to neutral territory." The woman's ears twitch forward, surprise. "You're releasing us." "I'm not releasing you because you were never properly imprisoned. This whole operation is illegal trafficking disguised as debt servitude, and I just spent way too much money to get you out of it." Marcus cuts through the restraint, then moves to the next woman. "Once we're somewhere safe, I'll sign whatever emancipation documents are needed to void these contracts." "Why?" another woman asks, her voice carrying an accent that suggests high education. "You don't know us. We could be criminals, debtors, dangerous." "You could be," Marcus agrees, cutting the third restraint. "But I saw how you carried yourselves up there. That's not how criminals stand. That's how people with training and discipline maintain their dignity in impossible circumstances." He finishes with the last restraint. "And even if I'm wrong, freedom shouldn't have conditions. You're people, not property." The 6 women exchange glances, some communication passing between them that Marcus can't interpret. Then the eldest, a woman who carries herself with particular authority, speaks. "We accept your terms, Marcus Webb, and we will remember this kindness." Something about the way she says it suggests significance beyond polite gratitude, but Marcus is too focused on logistics to analyze the nuance. He needs to get them off this station before the traffickers realize their merchandise has been freed rather than properly transferred. The chapter ends with Marcus escorting the 6 women through Meridian Gate's corridors, heading toward the docking bay where his contracted transport awaits. Behind them, the auction continues, other lives being bought and sold, other horrors proceeding with bureaucratic efficiency. But these 6, at least, are free. Marcus doesn't yet know their names, their true origins, or the political firestorm he's just ignited. He only knows he did what he could in the moment that mattered. Sometimes, that has to be enough. The second chapter covers the journey from Meridian Gate to Neutral Sanctuary and the beginning of Marcus's understanding that the women he freed aren't ordinary refugees. His transport is a mid-sized cargo vessel he'd contracted for the supply run. Nothing fancy, but equipped with basic passenger accommodations and enough security to deter casual pirates. The 6 Corvathi women settle into the passenger compartment with practiced efficiency, their movements still maintaining that unconscious coordination Marcus had noticed at the auction. He provides them with food, clean clothing from the ship's emergency supplies, and privacy to recover from their ordeal. When he checks on them several hours into the journey, he finds them organized like a military unit, the eldest woman clearly in command, the others deferring to her decisions, their quarters arranged with strategic precision that goes well beyond normal tidiness. "You've had military training," Marcus observes, not quite making it a question. The eldest woman, who still hasn't offered her name, regards him calmly. We've had extensive training in many things, defense being among them. The traffickers who held you, did they know? They knew we were Corvathi. They didn't know much beyond that. Her ears angle forward slightly, a gesture Marcus has learned indicates focus or interest. You said you work in humanitarian relief. What brings someone with those principles to a place like Meridian Gate? Marcus explains his work, negotiating supply contracts for refugee settlements, navigating the gray markets that often provide the only access to resources in frontier territories, the constant ethical compromises required to help people who exist outside proper governmental support. It's not heroic work, he says. Mostly it's paperwork, negotiations with morally questionable merchants, and trying to stretch inadequate budgets to cover desperate needs. But someone has to do it, and I'm apparently too stubborn to quit. Yet you spent your operational budget to free us, the woman says. That seems heroic. That was impulse. Probably stupid impulse that's going to cause problems when I can't afford the supply contracts I came here to negotiate. Marcus runs a hand through his hair, exhaustion catching up with him. But I couldn't watch that auction and do nothing. Some lines you can't uncross. The women exchange those glances again. That silent communication that suggests shared history and deep familiarity. Then the youngest speaks, a woman who looks barely into adulthood, with the kind of formal bearing that suggests aristocratic upbringing. Marcus Webb, you should understand what you've done. We are not ordinary refugees. I gathered that from the way you carry yourselves. We are daughters of House Valen, of the Talvirian sovereign. Marcus processes this information slowly. House Valen, the Talvirian sovereign, which means, your royalty. You're the queen's daughters, the eldest confirms. 6 of 12. We were abducted 4 years ago during a civil uprising on one of our colony worlds. The insurgents intended to use us as leverage against our mother. When that failed, they sold us to traffickers who have been moving us through various markets, always staying ahead of our mother's search efforts. The implications crash through Marcus like physical force. He hasn't just freed trafficking victims. He's freed the kidnapped daughters of one of the most powerful rulers in this sector of the galaxy. The kind of political situation that starts wars, topples governments, and gets humanitarian contractors caught in the crossfire. Okay, he says slowly. Okay, that's complicated. Extremely complicated, agrees the eldest daughter. Our mother has been searching for us for 4 years. She's been very careful. Overt military action would endanger us, and the traffickers knew it. They've been using our value as insurance, threatening to kill us if the Talvirian fleet moved against them. But now you're free. We just need to get you to neutral territory where you can contact your mother safely. It's not that simple, says another daughter, this one perhaps mid-20s, with an analytical expression that suggests she's the strategic thinker of the group. The trafficking network that held us is vast, well-connected, and protected by certain political interests who profit from the gray market. If they realize we've been freed, they'll either try to recapture us or kill us to eliminate evidence. Which is why we maintained composure at the auction, adds the youngest. Why we didn't reveal our identities or show recognition. When we saw you spending money, you clearly couldn't afford to free strangers. We needed to be certain you wouldn't use us for your own leverage. Marcus feels slightly sick. You thought I might try to ransom you. Most would, the eldest says gently. 6 royal daughters. That's enough leverage to negotiate almost anything, territory rights, trade agreements, military support. The fact that you cut our restraints and spoke of freedom without conditions, that's extraordinarily rare. The rest of the journey is spent planning. The daughters explain the political situation in more detail. The civil uprising that created the opportunity for their abduction, the years of careful searching that couldn't risk their safety, the network of corruption that has protected the traffickers, the delicate balance their mother has maintained between searching desperately and not triggering the threats against their lives. Marcus contributes his knowledge of neutral territories, the relief networks that operate outside official government control, the secure communication channels that humanitarian organizations use to move information through dangerous regions. They settle on Haven Station, a neutral sanctuary in the Epsilon Reach that serves as a refugee processing center and operates under the protection of the Interstellar Relief Coalition. It's one of the few places in this region where the Talvirian sovereign could safely retrieve her daughters without triggering a larger conflict. During these conversations, Marcus learns their names. Vera, the eldest and most politically trained, Lissa, the strategic analyst, Kale, the security specialist, Thera, the diplomat, Rin, the technical expert, and Sira, the youngest, who's been studying xenocultural integration. He also learns that despite their ordeal, they've maintained their training, their connection to each other, and their fundamental belief in their mother's values, which apparently includes strong positions on justice, protection of the vulnerable, and opposition to exploitation. Your mother, Marcus says during one conversation. What's she like, besides being a powerful sovereign who's probably going to be terrifying when she arrives? She's exactly what you'd expect, Vera says. Strong, strategic, absolutely committed to protecting her people. But she's also deeply principled about certain things. She believes power exists to serve rather than to dominate, that those with advantages have responsibilities to those without. She would approve of what you did, Sira adds quietly. Spending resources you couldn't afford to free people you didn't know. That's exactly the kind of choice she teaches us to value. Let's hope she still approves after I've spent 4 years failing to find you when a random humanitarian contractor managed it by accident. You didn't find us by accident, Lissa says. You found us because you were the kind of person who would go to that auction to see the horror directly rather than accepting comfortable ignorance. That's not accident. That's character. The chapter ends with their arrival at Haven Station. Marcus uses his relief network credentials to secure immediate sanctuary for the 6 women, then helps them access the station's secure communications to contact their mother. The message is simple. Her daughters are alive, safe, and asking for retrieval. The location is provided. The source is identified as Marcus Webb, human relief contractor, who secured their freedom and is requesting no compensation, recognition, or political favor. They wait for response in one of the station's secured guest quarters. The daughters are composed, but Marcus notices the way their ears cycle through various positions, nervousness, hope, anticipation mixing together. Then Vera's datapad chimes with incoming message. She reads it, her ears going fully forward, pure joy, and her composure finally cracks as tears stream down her face. She's coming. Mother's bringing the fleet. She'll be here within 20 hours. The other daughters react with similar emotional release. 4 years of maintained discipline collapsing into relief, joy, the knowledge that their ordeal is truly ending. Marcus steps back, giving them privacy for their reunion preparations. He's already planning his departure. His job is done. The supply contracts on Meridian Gate are probably lost, and he needs to figure out how to salvage his humanitarian operations with a dramatically reduced budget. But for tonight, 6 women who'd been enslaved are free and going home. That has to count for something. Marcus tries to fade into the background, his role complete, but the daughters refuse to let him disappear. They insist he remain present when their mother arrives, arguing that he deserves recognition for what he's done. I just bought some contracts and signed emancipation papers, Marcus protests. That's not exactly heroic. You spent everything you had to free strangers, Vera counters. You asked nothing in return. You didn't even ask our names before cutting our restraints. Do you understand how rare that is? Most beings, faced with the opportunity to own 6 Korvathi women, would have. She stops, her ears angling backward briefly. Let's just say your immediate decision to free us was statistically anomalous. During these waiting hours, Marcus learns more about the political situation he's inadvertently affected. The trafficking network that held the daughters is part of a larger criminal organization with connections to several systems governments. The organization has operated with impunity for years, protected by corrupt officials and the profits their operations generate. The daughters' abduction and subsequent trafficking has been an open secret in certain circles. Everyone knew the Talvirian sovereign's daughters were missing. Many suspected they'd been trafficked, but no one acted because the political complications were too severe and the profits too lucrative. Your mother couldn't act directly without endangering you, Marcus says, piecing together the situation. But now that you're safely recovered, she can. Now that we're safely recovered by someone with no political connections or ulterior motives, she can, Lissa corrects. If we'd been freed by a government, there would be obligations, debts, political leverage. Your independence means Mother can act without appearing to owe favors to any faction. I didn't think about political implications. I just saw people who needed help. Exactly, that's why this matters. Marcus also learns about Queen Valen herself, a ruler who took power during a difficult period, who's built her legitimacy on strong principles about justice and protection of the vulnerable, who's been privately devastated by her daughter's abduction, but couldn't let that emotion compromise their safety. She'll want to reward you, Thera mentions, probably substantially. Mother believes in honoring debts. I don't want reward. I don't want anything except maybe help covering the supply contracts I couldn't complete because I spent my budget freeing you. That's exactly the kind of response that will make her respect you, Sierra says. Mother has dealt with so many people who want things from her: power, money, advantage. Someone who just wants to finish his humanitarian work. That's refreshing. The fleet arrives precisely on schedule. 12 Talvirian warships, impressive even by galactic standards, their technology and capabilities placing them among the most advanced military forces in known space. Haven Station sensors track their approach with the kind of nervous attention usually reserved for potential threats. But the fleet doesn't position aggressively. They establish polite orbital patterns, request standard diplomatic docking for a single ship, the Queen's vessel, and transmit appropriate protocols for peaceful contact. Marcus watches from the secured guest quarters observation window as the royal ship approaches. It's beautiful in a way military vessels rarely are. Sleek lines and elegant design married to clearly formidable capabilities. She's here, Vera says quietly, her ears trembling with emotion. After 4 years, Mother's actually here. The reunion happens in one of Haven Station's diplomatic suites, hastily prepared for royal presence. Station administration wanted elaborate ceremony, but the Queen's advance staff made clear this was a family matter first, diplomatic formality second. Marcus waits with the daughters, feeling increasingly out of place in a situation that should involve queens and royalty and politics far beyond his humanitarian work. He's about to excuse himself when the doors open and Queen Valen enters. She's striking, tall even by Corvathi standards, wearing formal robes that somehow manage to be both elegant and practical, her bearing suggesting absolute authority tempered by deep compassion. Her ears cycle through rapid positions as she sees her daughters, shock, joy, relief cascading across her features. Then she's moving, crossing the room with speed that abandons royal dignity in favor of maternal urgency. The daughters meet her halfway, and the reunion is private, emotional. 6 women who'd maintained composure through 4 years of captivity, finally able to break down in their mother's arms. Marcus backs toward the door, trying to give them privacy. This is their moment, not his. Wait, Queen Valen says, her voice carrying command even through emotion. She's looking at Marcus directly now, her amber eyes assessing him with an intensity that makes him feel transparent. You're Marcus Webb. Yes, Your Majesty. I'll leave you to your reunion. You will stay, please. She approaches him, and Marcus notices she moves with the same unconscious grace as her daughters, the same disciplined precision. My daughters have told me what you did, how you spent resources you couldn't afford to free strangers at an illegal auction, how you asked nothing in return, demanded no leverage, simply signed emancipation papers and brought them to safety. I did what anyone should do in that situation, Your Majesty. But most wouldn't. Most would see opportunity for profit, for influence, for advantage. You saw people who needed help. She studies him for a long moment. My intelligence network has been searching for my daughters for 4 years. We've spent enormous resources, called in every favor, monitored every trafficking route in this region. And a human relief contractor, operating on a modest budget with no military support, accomplished in one evening what my entire empire couldn't manage in 4 years. I got lucky, Your Majesty. I happened to be in the right place. You made a choice, she interrupts. That's not luck, that's character. Her ears angle forward, complete attention and something that might be respect. Marcus Webb, you've returned my daughters when I'd begun to lose hope I'd ever see them alive again. There's no way to adequately thank you for that, but I'm going to try. Your Majesty, I really don't need. I'm not asking what you need. I'm telling you what you've earned. Her tone brooks no argument. First, your humanitarian operations will receive full financial backing to replace what you spent freeing my daughters, and enough additional funding to expand your operations for the next decade. Second, the Talvirian sovereign formally recognizes you as a friend of the crown, which grants you certain diplomatic protections and access. Third, she pauses, her expression hardening. I'm going to dismantle every trafficking network and corrupt system that allowed my daughters to be held for 4 years. That last one isn't about me, Your Majesty. No, but your actions freed my daughters from a system that's operated with impunity for too long, protected by political interests that profit from suffering. You've given me the moral authority to act without appearing to abuse power, because you, as an independent actor with no political connections, have proven the system is broken. Marcus processes this. You're using my accidental heroics as justification for systematic reform. I'm using your deliberate choice to free enslaved people as a demonstration that such choices are possible, that power and resources can be used for justice rather than exploitation. She moves closer, her voice dropping to something more personal than royal decree. Marcus Webb, do you understand? The humanitarian contractor, who just wanted to help some people, has accidentally sparked a political revolution that will reshape this entire sector's approach to trafficking and exploitation. And he still doesn't quite believe he did anything special. Queen Valen doesn't just express gratitude. She acts with the full force of her empire's resources to transform the situation that allowed her daughters to be trafficked for 4 years. Within days of the reunion, the Talvirian sovereign announces comprehensive reforms, enhanced enforcement of anti-trafficking laws, diplomatic pressure on systems that harbor these operations, public exposure of the corrupt officials who protected the networks, and massive investment in monitoring and intervention programs. But crucially, she frames all of this around Marcus's example. A single individual, operating with limited resources and no political power, chose to act when he saw injustice. He demonstrated that freedom should never have conditions, that people are not property, that moral courage matters more than calculated advantage. If one human relief contractor can make this choice, then entire governments can and must do the same. The political impact is enormous. Systems that had tolerated gray market trafficking suddenly face diplomatic isolation if they don't reform. The trafficking networks lose their protected status as the corruption that shielded them becomes politically toxic. Haven Station and similar neutral sanctuaries receive increased funding and authority to intervene in trafficking situations. Marcus watches all of this from a strange position, simultaneously central to the story and completely peripheral to the actual political mechanisms. News services across multiple systems are running stories about the human who freed the lost princesses, mythologizing his actions into something far more dramatic than the reality of signing paperwork at an auction. "I'm not comfortable with this attention," he tells Vera during one of their conversations in the weeks following the reunion. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a contractor who saw something horrible and had the money to do something about it." "That's exactly why the story matters," Vera says. "You're not a military leader or government official or someone with special powers. You're ordinary, which means your choice to help was something any person could make." That's the point Mother's emphasizing. Moral action isn't reserved for those with advantages. It's available to anyone willing to choose it. "But I didn't do it for political reasons. I didn't even think about the larger implications." That's why it worked. If you'd been calculating political advantage, it would have been just another transaction. Because you simply helped people who needed help, it demonstrated actual principle. Marcus's humanitarian operations, as promised, receive full financial backing from the Talvirian sovereign. His modest operation suddenly has resources to expand significantly, opening new relief efforts in regions he couldn't previously afford to serve. But Queen Valen ensures the funding comes with no strings attached, no obligations beyond continuing the work he was already doing. "You gave my daughters freedom with no conditions," she says when they meet to finalize the arrangements. "I'm giving you resources with no conditions. Use them however you think best serves vulnerable populations." "That's a lot of trust, Your Majesty." "You earned it, and please call me Valen. You're friend of the crown now. That makes us equals in ways that matter." The trafficking networks collapse under sustained pressure. Some operators are arrested, others flee to regions where enforcement is even weaker. A few attempt to rebrand as legitimate labor contractors with suddenly improved working conditions. The gray market doesn't disappear. Corruption rarely does completely, but it becomes significantly riskier and less profitable. More importantly, the culture shifts. What was tacitly accepted as unfortunate but inevitable, that some beings would be exploited for others' profit, becomes actively questioned. Marcus's story, mythologized and widely distributed, serves as a counter-narrative to the cynical assumption that nothing can change, that individual actions don't matter, that the system is too entrenched to challenge. 6 months after the reunion, Haven Station hosts a formal ceremony. Queen Valen arrives with her full family, not just the 6 daughters Marcus freed, but all 12, the daughters who'd remained safe during the kidnapping, joining their sisters in honoring the person who ended their ordeal. The ceremony is elaborate, with protocols Marcus still doesn't fully understand and speeches in multiple languages. But the core message is simple. The Talvirian sovereign publicly honors Marcus Webb not as a hero, but as an example of the kind of person her empire aspires to celebrate, someone who chose justice when no one was watching. "You could have walked away from that auction," Queen Valen says during her formal remarks. "You could have reported it through official channels and let bureaucracy determine the response. You could have negotiated for some of the slaves while justifying leaving others behind. Instead, you spent everything you had to free strangers, asked nothing in return, and treated freedom as a right rather than a transaction. That's the behavior my empire exists to encourage." Then, in a gesture that becomes the defining image of the entire event, Queen Valen does something unprecedented. She kneels, not as a ruler but as a mother. "Marcus Webb, you returned my children when I'd begun to lose hope. There's no honor in my power that adequately reflects what you've given me. So I thank you not as queen, but as someone whose family is whole again because of your choice." The gesture is shocking. Royalty doesn't kneel, especially not to commoners. But Valen has made her point. Some debts transcend political hierarchy, some gratitude exists beyond formal protocol, and the return of her daughters matters more than maintaining royal distance. Marcus, deeply uncomfortable with the attention, helps her rise. Your Majesty, Valen, I didn't do it for this. I just couldn't watch people being sold like property and do nothing. I know that's why this matters. The final scene takes place a year after the initial rescue. Marcus is back in the field, running relief operations in a frontier territory, coordinating supply deliveries and refugee support with his now expanded budget. His team has grown, his impact has multiplied, but the core work remains the same: helping people who need it, navigating complicated situations, trying to make small differences in large problems. He receives a message from Sira, the youngest daughter. She's completed her studies in xenocultural integration and has joined a diplomatic initiative focused on improving cooperation between human and Korvathi settlements in border regions. Her message includes an update on her sisters. Vera has taken an active role in governance reform. Lissa runs a strategic analysis center. Kale directs security improvements for vulnerable communities. Thera leads diplomatic efforts around trafficking prevention, and Rin develops technology for monitoring and intervention. We're all using what we learned during our captivity, Sira writes, turning our ordeal into tools for preventing others from suffering the same fate. Mother says you taught us that what matters isn't what happens to you, but how you choose to respond. Marcus reads the message while reviewing supply manifests, and he thinks about the strange path that led here. An impulse decision at an illegal auction, spending money he couldn't afford, freeing people whose names he didn't know. It shouldn't have mattered as much as it did. It shouldn't have sparked political reforms or inspired diplomatic initiatives or become a story that gets told across multiple systems. But sometimes, the story suggests, the smallest moral choices create the largest ripples. Not because they're calculated for maximum impact, but because they're genuine, pure expressions of principle without expectation of reward. A new message arrives, this one from Queen Valen herself, brief and personal. Thank you, not just for what you did, but for proving it was possible. The galaxy is watching, and they're learning that choice matters. Marcus closes the message and returns to his supply manifests. There's a refugee settlement in the outer territories that needs medical equipment, a border community requiring water purification systems, 3 different crises competing for his limited attention and resources. The work continues. The problems don't disappear. But now when Marcus faces impossible situations, he remembers that sometimes doing the right thing, even when it seems futile, can matter more than you imagine. 6 women were enslaved. 1 person chose to free them. An empire remembered the lesson. And across the galaxy, in small ways and large, people began asking themselves, what would I do in that situation? What would I choose if no one was watching? The answer to those questions, Marcus knows now, is how you actually change the world. One choice at a time. One act of principle when it would be easier to look away. One moment of believing that freedom should never have conditions, that people matter more than profit, that doing the right thing is its own justification. The humanitarian contractor returns to his work, ordinary and unremarkable, still not quite believing he did anything special. But the galaxy remembers, and in remembering it becomes just slightly better. Meridian Gate smelled like recycled air that had passed through too many filters, and moral compromise that had been normalized through repetition. Marcus Webb navigated the main commercial district with practiced wariness, his datapad displaying supply manifests that represented the difference between life and death for settlements he'd never personally visited, but had come to care about anyway. 8 years of humanitarian relief work had taught him uncomfortable lessons about how the galaxy actually functioned. The idealistic version, where governments coordinated resources efficiently, where international aid organizations operated with integrity, where helping vulnerable populations was treated as moral imperative rather than political calculation. That version existed mainly in recruitment materials and fundraising presentations. The reality was places like Meridian Gate, The trade station occupied a legal gray zone between three major star systems, technically governed by the Interstellar Commerce Accord, but practically operating as a haven for transactions that would be illegal in any properly regulated territory. Black market goods, smuggling operations, laundered resources, and the kind of business arrangements that required everyone involved to maintain careful ignorance about where things came from and where they were going. Marcus hated it here. Hated the casual corruption, the predatory merchants, the pervasive sense that everything and everyone had a price. But he kept coming back because desperate people needed supplies, and supplies sourced through legal channels either didn't exist in sufficient quantities or came with bureaucratic delays that turned urgent needs into humanitarian disasters. So he dealt with merchants like Torin Misk. The Zellan trader spotted Marcus from across the crowded marketplace, his multiple eye stalks swiveling with what might have been pleasure or predatory interest, difficult to distinguish with Zellans, whose biology made most human-readable expressions impossible. Misk navigated through the crowd with practiced ease, his four manipulator arms carrying various datapads and sample cases. Webb. His voice carried over the background noise, a dozen languages mixing together, translation devices creating a constant low hum of linguistic conversion. Back again. I distinctly remember you saying, and I quote, "I'm done with this morally bankrupt station and everyone on it." That was 3 months ago, Marcus said, not slowing his pace toward the warehouse district. Then people needed things I couldn't source through legal channels. The eternal humanitarian dilemma. Misk fell into step beside him, eye stalks tracking both Marcus and potential threats from the crowd. Your principles versus their survival. How's that working out for your conscience? About as well as your business practices work for yours. I sleep perfectly well, thank you. Unlike you, I've accepted that the galaxy runs on pragmatic self-interest rather than altruistic idealism. Misk's tone was cheerful, untroubled by the implicit criticism. Speaking of which, you wanted water purification systems. I have them. At the price we discussed, which you'll complain about while paying anyway because your refugees need clean water more than you need financial solvency. The transaction took place in one of Misk's warehouses, a converted cargo bay that smelled like synthetic lubricants and contained enough questionable merchandise to probably violate multiple interstellar trade agreements. The water purification units were exactly what Marcus needed, robust enough for frontier conditions, simple enough for refugees to maintain, and priced at about 40% higher than they should be. These better actually work, Marcus said, transferring credits while his heart sank at the numbers leaving his operational budget. Last time you sold me frontier-grade equipment, half of it failed within 2 weeks. That was a different supplier. This batch is quality. Misk's eye stalks focused on Marcus with something that might have been genuine curiosity. You know, I've been wondering something. You're smart, competent, good at navigating complicated logistics. You could be making serious money if you worked for profit instead of charity. Why don't you? Because people matter more than profit margins. Spoken like someone who's never had to make actual choices about survival. But hey, your moral superiority probably keeps you warm at night when you're eating emergency rations in a refugee camp. Misk paused, several eye stalks glancing around the warehouse before refocusing on Marcus. Actually, speaking of moral superiority and uncomfortable realities, there's something you might want to know about. If you're about to try selling me something else. Not selling, informing. There's an auction tonight. Exclusive event, invitation only, requires substantial financial credentials to even get through the door. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. What kind of auction? The kind that operates under debt servitude paperwork, but everyone knows what it actually is. Misk's tone remained casual, but his eye stalks were focused entirely on Marcus now. Look, I know you try to stay clean in this dirty business. You source supplies, but you don't ask too many questions about where they originate. You maintain plausible deniability about how the gray market actually functions. Get to the point, Misk. The point is that sometimes plausible deniability is just another word for complicity. Sometimes you need to see the horror directly before you can do anything about it, or before you can even decide if you want to try. Misk pulled a small data chip from one of his cases. Invitation details, encrypted access codes, whether you use them is your choice. But don't pretend later that you didn't know this stuff happens. Marcus took the chip, weighing it in his palm like it was something heavier than electronics and compressed data. Why are you telling me this? Honestly, because watching you struggle with ethical compromises is entertaining. Also because I'm curious what you'll actually do when confronted with the really ugly parts of the system you're operating in. Misk's eye stalks swiveled in what might have been a shrug. Most people make their peace with it. They rationalize, compartmentalize, convince themselves that one person can't change anything, so why bother trying? But you might actually be dumb enough to care. The conversation ended there. Misk returning to his various business dealings, while Marcus stood in that warehouse surrounded by supplies that would save lives, and trying to decide if he wanted to know what kind of auction required encrypted invitations and substantial financial credentials. He should walk away, complete his supply contracts, return to the settlements that depended on him, maintain the careful distance that kept him functional in this work. Getting involved in whatever Misk was hinting at would only complicate things, compromise his ability to operate, potentially endanger the entire relief operation he'd built. Every rational calculation said to delete the invitation, pretend this conversation never happened, and focus on the work he could actually affect. Marcus pocketed the data chip and finished loading the purification systems onto his transport. 6 hours later, he found himself in the lower commercial district of Meridian Gate, following encrypted directions to a converted cargo bay that had been temporarily configured for purposes that made his humanitarian instincts scream warnings. The auction space was surprisingly elaborate for something operating in legal gray zones. Environmental controls maintained comfortable atmosphere. Holographic displays showed lot numbers and bidding information. Comfortable seating arranged in amphitheater style facing a raised platform. About 50 beings were already assembled, various species, all clearly wealthy enough to be here, all maintaining the careful neutral expressions of people engaging in business they knew was morally questionable but legally ambiguous enough to allow plausible deniability. Marcus found a seat in the back, his relief contractor credentials apparently sufficient to pass the financial screening. A server approached offering refreshments, which Marcus declined, his attention fixed on the platform where the first lots were being prepared for presentation. The auctioneer was a Trellin, species known for their smooth vocal patterns and general comfort with morally flexible business arrangements. He spoke in tones that managed to sound both professional and slightly unctuous, describing the first items available for bidding. Debt servitude contracts, the auctioneer explained smoothly. All legally documented under interstellar commerce accord provisions regarding contracted labor. The individuals you'll see have signed agreements trading specified periods of service in exchange for passage, shelter, debt forgiveness, or other mutually agreed compensation. It was technically legal. The Commerce Accord allowed for certain types of contracted labor, acknowledging that beings in desperate circumstances might need to trade future service for immediate resources. The regulations were supposed to protect workers, specifying maximum contract lengths, minimum working conditions, dispute resolution processes. In practice, Marcus knew from his humanitarian work, the system was riddled with exploitation. Contracts signed under duress or deception. Impossible debt structures that trap people in permanent servitude. Working conditions that violated every protection theoretically guaranteed by the Accord. The first several lots confirmed his suspicions. Beings were brought onto the platform, individuals of various species, all maintaining the defeated posture of people who'd learned that resistance only made things worse. Their contracts were presented as voluntary agreements. Their circumstances were described in deliberately vague terms that avoided specifics about how they'd ended up in debt, or why they'd signed agreements trading their freedom for uncertain promises. The bidding proceeded with efficient indifference. Labor contractors looking for workers, station operators seeking staff, wealthy individuals wanting personal servants. Each transaction completed with paperwork that technically made it legal commerce rather than human trafficking. Marcus sat through it with growing disgust, his hands clenched on the armrests, watching people be sold while everyone in the room pretended this was just business. He was calculating how many he could possibly afford to purchase and free when the auctioneer announced the next lot. Item 47. Group lot of 6 Corvathi females, ages ranging from apparent young adult to mid-30s by standard estimation. Contracts transferable as set, terms of 5 years standard servitude with options for renewal pending mutual agreement. 6 women were escorted onto the platform, and Marcus felt something shift in his perception. Corvathi, humanoid species distinguished by their long, elegant ears that moved independently to express emotion or indicate focus. Their empire was centered in the Talviria system, an advanced civilization that maintained strict neutrality in most galactic conflicts, but possessed military capabilities that made even major powers cautious about provocation. These women shouldn't be here. Something was very wrong. What struck Marcus immediately was their bearing. Despite their circumstances, wearing simple clothing that suggested extended captivity, their wrists bound with restraints that were purely symbolic since the station's security systems provided actual containment, they stood with perfect posture. Straight backs, heads high, expressions carefully neutral. Their ears told different stories than their faces. Angled backward in the Corvathi expression indicating caution or defensive posture, rotating slightly as they tracked various sounds and movements in the room, occasionally trembling with suppressed emotion that their disciplined faces refused to show. But even under obvious duress, they moved with unconscious coordination. When the first woman shifted her weight, the others adjusted instinctively. Maintaining formation like this was drilled muscle memory. When the auctioneer gestured for them to turn, displaying them for the assembled bidders, they moved in synchronized precision that spoke of years of shared training. The auctioneer provided minimal backstory. Refugees from civil conflict in the outer Corvathi territories. Debts incurred during transport through frontier regions. Standard labor contracts, legally documented, all terms in compliance with Commerce Accord provisions. It was almost certainly fabricated. Marcus's 8 years of humanitarian work had taught him to recognize the signs, the deliberately vague details, the absence of specific documentation, the way the auctioneer glossed over anything that might invite uncomfortable questions. These women had been trafficked, kidnapped or coerced or caught in circumstances that left them vulnerable, then fed into a system that gave their exploitation legal paperwork. The bidding started. A labor contractor from one of the frontier mining operations opened at 30,000 credits for the set. A station operator countered with 35. A private bidder whose species Marcus didn't immediately recognize raised it to 40. Marcus found himself doing calculations he knew were insane. His operational budget for the next quarter, his personal savings, the emergency funds he'd set aside for humanitarian crises that required immediate cash responses. Altogether, maybe 70,000 credits, enough to complete his supply contracts, keep his relief operations running, help the settlements depending on his logistics network, or enough to buy 6 people out of slavery. He shouldn't do this, couldn't afford to do this. One gesture wouldn't stop the system that allowed this auction to operate, would probably only get him killed or compromise his ability to help the thousands of refugees depending on his work. The rational choice was to walk away, report what he'd seen through official channels, let enforcement agencies handle it. The bidding reached 50,000. Marcus thought about the water purification systems he'd just purchased, about the medical supplies scheduled for delivery next week, about the shelter materials needed for the displaced families on 3 different frontier worlds. He thought about 6 women standing on that platform with careful dignity, maintaining composure despite circumstances that would break most people. He thought about principles he'd told himself he believed in, that people aren't property, that freedom matters more than financial calculations, that some lines can't be uncrossed. The bidding reached 60,000. 65, Marcus heard himself say, his voice carrying through the auction space. Heads turned. Several beings focused on him with expressions ranging from curiosity to calculation. The auctioneer's smooth voice acknowledged the bid. 65,000 credits from bidder 73. Do I hear 70? The private bidder who'd been driving the price up hesitated, reassessing, made a gesture Marcus interpreted as withdrawal. The labor contractor looked frustrated but apparently had reached his budget limit. 65,000 going once, the auctioneer said, going twice. Sold to bidder 73 for 65,000 credits. Marcus completed the financial transfer in a state somewhere between shock and grim determination. Watched numbers drain from his operational accounts, money that represented months of careful budgeting, negotiations with donors, personal sacrifices. All of it flowing away to purchase contracts that shouldn't exist from traffickers who should be arrested rather than facilitated. The paperwork came next: transfer of debt servitude contracts, liability waivers, documentation that supposedly made this legitimate commerce rather than human trafficking. The legalese was dense, deliberately obscure, designed to make everything seem proper and regulated. Marcus signed it all mechanically, his mind focused on a single objective: get these 6 women out of this cargo bay before the traffickers realized their merchandise had been freed rather than properly transferred to a new owner. When the transaction was complete, station security escorted him to a holding area where the 6 women waited. They stood in the same formation they'd maintained on the platform, their ears angled backward, their expressions carefully controlled. Marcus approached slowly, aware that from their perspective he was just another buyer, another person who'd purchased the right to own them. He pulled a small cutting tool from his jacket, standard equipment for relief work, useful for opening supply containers and emergency repairs. The nearest woman stiffened as he approached, her ears flattening further. The others shifted into slightly more defensive positions while maintaining their synchronized formation. "I'm going to cut these restraints," Marcus said quietly, keeping his movements slow and visible. "Then we're going to walk out of here calmly and find transport to neutral territory. No running, no drawing attention, just normal movement until we're safely away from the station." The woman's ears twitched forward slightly, surprise breaking through her controlled expression. "You're releasing us." "I'm not releasing you because you were never properly imprisoned. This whole operation is illegal trafficking disguised as debt servitude, and I just spent my entire operational budget to get you out of it." Marcus cut through the first restraint with quick precision. The material was designed more for psychological effect than actual security. The real containment came from station systems they'd need to evade carefully. "Once we're somewhere safe, I'll sign whatever emancipation documents are needed to void these contracts entirely." He moved to the next woman, cutting her restraints while she watched him with an expression that mixed wariness with growing hope. "Why?" she asked, her voice carrying an accent that suggested high education and formal training. "You don't know us. We could be criminals. We could be dangerous." "You could be," Marcus agreed, moving to the third woman. "But I saw how you carried yourselves up there on that platform, how you maintained formation even in restraints, how you moved with synchronized precision that takes years of training to achieve. That's not how criminals stand." That's how people with discipline and shared purpose maintain their dignity in impossible circumstances. He finished with the fourth restraint, then the fifth, finally the sixth. All six women now stood free, their wrists showing marks from long-term restraint but no longer bound. They were watching him with focused attention, their ears cycling through positions that suggested rapid processing of unexpected information. And even if I'm wrong about you, Marcus continued, gathering the cut restraints and disposing of them in a waste container, freedom shouldn't have conditions. You're people, not property. Whatever debts these contracts claim you owe, whatever circumstances brought you here, none of that justifies what was happening on that platform. The eldest woman, Marcus could see the authority in her bearing, the way the others unconsciously oriented toward her, studied him for a long moment. Her ears went through a complex series of positions before settling into forward attention. We accept your terms, Marcus Webb. Her use of his name was deliberate, checking information she must have obtained from the transaction documents. And we will remember this kindness. Something about the way she said it carried weight beyond polite gratitude, but Marcus was too focused on immediate logistics to analyze the nuance. We need to leave. Now. The traffickers will expect a normal transfer process. New owner takes possession. Everyone goes their separate ways. But if they realize I've actually freed you, they'll either try to recapture you or alert station security to prevent us from leaving. You have a ship? The youngest woman asked. Contracted transport. Mid-sized cargo vessel, nothing fancy, but it has basic passenger accommodations and enough security to deter casual pirates. It's docked at Bay 47, which is. Marcus checked his datapad. 8 minutes walk from here if we take the commercial corridors. Then we should go, the eldest said with decisive authority. She looked at her companions and some silent communication passed between them. They shifted into a different formation. Less military precision, more the casual arrangement of travelers moving together. We'll follow your lead. The walk through Meridian Gate's corridors was simultaneously the longest and shortest 8 minutes of Marcus's life. Every station security officer they passed felt like a potential threat. Every surveillance camera seemed focused specifically on their group. Every announcement over the station's communication system sounded like it might be alerting authorities to unauthorized movement. But the 6 women moved with practiced calm, maintaining the appearance of routine transfer. To casual observers, they were probably just contractor and workers relocating for new assignment. Nothing unusual, nothing worth investigating. Bay 47 appeared ahead, its familiar configuration a relief. Marcus's contracted transport, the Meridian Runner, a mid-sized cargo vessel he'd been working with for 3 years, sat in its docking cradle, hull scarred from frontier travel but mechanically sound. The ship's captain, a grizzled human named Rodriguez who'd learned not to ask too many questions about Marcus's humanitarian work, was waiting at the airlock. His eyebrows rose slightly as he took in the 6 Corvathi women, but his tone remained professionally neutral. Picking up passengers, Webb. Emergency evacuation. I'll explain once we're underway. Can we depart immediately? Clearance is already filed. We can be disconnected from dock in 5 minutes. Rodriguez's eyes met Marcus's, understanding passing between them. Where are we heading? Haven Station, Epsilon Reach. Fastest possible route that avoids major checkpoints. That's going to add about 6 hours to transit time and cost extra in fuel reconfiguration. Do it, I'll cover the costs. Rodriguez nodded and disappeared into the ship's control section. Marcus gestured for the women to board, following them through the airlock and sealing it behind them. Only when the ship's environmental systems registered sealed hull and the docking clamps began their release sequence did he allow himself to believe they'd actually made it. The 6 women had settled into the passenger compartment with efficiency that reinforced Marcus's impression of military training. By the time he joined them, they'd already assessed the space, identified emergency equipment locations, and arranged themselves in a configuration that suggested tactical awareness rather than casual comfort. "We're safe," Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "Station sensors show normal departure. No alerts, no security flags. We'll be in hyperspace transit within 10 minutes, and once we're there, it'll be very difficult for anyone to track us." The eldest woman's ears angled forward, relief cutting through her maintained composure. "Thank you, Marcus Webb, for what you've done, for the risks you've taken, for—" She paused, seeming to search for words. "For seeing us as people rather than merchandise. That's not something you should have to thank someone for. That should be basic decency." "Should be, yes, but rarely is in our experience." Marcus pulled up a chair, aware that they probably had questions and definitely deserved answers. "I'm going to go make sure we're on course for Haven Station, then I'll bring food and clean clothing. There are refresher facilities attached to this compartment if you want to clean up. The door locks from the inside. You're free to secure yourselves if that makes you more comfortable. You're trusting us with unsupervised access to your ship?" the youngest woman asked, surprise evident in both her voice and the forward angle of her ears. "I just spent 65,000 credits to free you. I'm pretty committed to trusting you at this point." He left them with access to the compartment's amenities, making his way to the ship's small galley to assemble food supplies. Rodriguez met him there, his expression suggesting he'd been waiting for this conversation. "So," the captain said, "6 Corvathi women, extracted from what I'm guessing was a very illegal situation. Want to tell me what I've gotten my ship involved in?" "I bought them at an auction. Debt servitude contracts that were obviously trafficking disguised as legal commerce. Then I freed them and were taking them to neutral sanctuary where they can contact whatever support networks they have." "You bought them at an auction." Rodriguez repeated this flatly. "With what money exactly? Because I know your operational budget, Webb, and you didn't have 65,000 credits in discretionary spending." "I had it, now I don't." "Which means the supply contracts you came to Meridian Gate to complete won't be completed. The refugee settlements will have to wait for next quarter's funding." Rodriguez stared at him for a long moment. "You're aware that's insane, right? You've potentially compromised relief operations that hundreds of people depend on to rescue 6 strangers." "I'm aware of what I did and why I did it, and I'd make the same choice again. Even though it might mean those refugee settlements don't get the water purification systems they need. Even though delayed medical supplies could cost lives. Even though you've basically set your humanitarian work back by months." Marcus felt the weight of those questions settle on his shoulders. "Yeah, even though. Because if I can watch people being sold as property and do nothing because it's financially inconvenient, then what the hell am I actually doing with this work? What principles am I supposed to be operating on?" Rodriguez's expression softened slightly. "You're an idealistic idiot, Webb." "Probably. But I'm an idealistic idiot who couldn't live with myself if I'd walked away from that auction." The captain helped him gather food supplies and clean clothing from the ship's emergency stores. "For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Stupid, financially catastrophic, probably going to cause you all kinds of problems. But right." When Marcus returned to the passenger compartment with supplies, he found the 6 women in quiet conversation. They stopped when he entered, their ears tracking his movement with focused attention. "Food," he said, setting down the containers. "Emergency rations mostly, nothing fancy, but it's nutritious and safe for Corvathi biology according to my xenobiological database. Clean clothing from ship stores, might not fit perfectly, but better than what you're wearing. Refresher facilities are through that door if you want privacy." The eldest woman accepted the supplies with a slight bow, formal gesture that suggested aristocratic training. "You've been very generous, Marcus Webb. May we know more about you? About why a human relief contractor would spend his operational budget freeing strangers?" Not much to know. I do humanitarian work, coordinate supplies for refugee settlements, displaced populations, communities that exist outside normal governmental support. It's not heroic work. Mostly it's logistics and negotiations with morally questionable merchants, and trying to stretch inadequate budgets to cover desperate needs. Yet you just spent that inadequate budget freeing us. Observed the woman who seemed to be the strategic thinker of the group. Yeah, which was probably stupid, and is definitely going to cause problems when I have to explain to my donors why I can't complete the projects they funded. Marcus pulled up a chair, suddenly exhausted by the day's events. But I went to that auction thinking I might buy 1 or 2 people's freedom as a symbolic gesture. Then I saw you 6 standing there with such dignity despite everything, and I just couldn't leave you there. The youngest woman spoke quietly. Marcus Webb, you should understand what you've actually done. We are not ordinary refugees. Marcus felt a